In the middle of the glittering gala, she grabbed a billionaire's hand to escape her violent ex, only to realize, too late, she had just chosen the one man more dangerous and deadlier than the monster she just ran from. Hi, my beautiful family. Thank you for sticking around with me. I really appreciate your love and support. We're back again to give you many more beautiful stories. If you're already hooked in for today's story and ready to enjoy it, click subscribe and let me know in the comments where you're watching from. Because tomorrow, I will be giving you another story just as interesting as this one, and you don't want to miss it. Now let us begin. The chandeliers of the ballroom dripped with diamonds, each crystal catching fire beneath the flood of golden light. The air smelled of champagne and expensive perfume, laughter bubbling like champagne flutes, hiding the sharpened edges of whispered politics and glittering deceit. This was no ordinary gala. It was the kind where masks weren't worn on faces, but in the polite curve of a smile, in the practiced flick of a wrist holding crystal glasses, in the carefully constructed illusions of power. And she, Isabella Hart, stood at the very center of it all as though she belonged. Her gown was borrowed, emerald silk clinging to her curves as though stitched to her skin. Her necklace wasn't hers either, on loan from a friend who worked at a boutique. To anyone watching, she could have been a princess, a woman born to this room of power and excess. But beneath the silk, her body trembled with the kind of fear you can't mask, no matter how still you stand. Because she knew he was here. She felt him before she saw him, that cold weight on her spine, the way the room seemed to shift, laughter dulling into a hum in her ears. Her breath stilled when she finally spotted him across the ballroom. Damien Kane, tall, sharp in his black tux, shoulders squared like a soldier, jaw clenched as though it had never known softness. His eyes, those storm-gray eyes that had once made her fall, that had once whispered promises into her skin, were fixed on her. And in that gaze, she saw everything she had run from. Rage, possession, and something else. Something worse. Her chest tightened. 1,000 nights came rushing back. The slammed doors, the words that cut deeper than fists, the moments of passion so tangled with pain she no longer knew where one ended and the other began. She had left him to survive. She had promised herself she would never stand in his shadow again. And yet, here he was, haunting her in a room full of strangers. She gripped her champagne flute tighter, her knuckles whitening against the glass stem. "Don't look at him," she whispered under her breath, willing herself to blend into the crowd. But Damien was already moving. He cut through the room like a blade through silk, eyes locked on her, shoulders brushing past billionaires, heiresses, and politicians who instantly stepped aside. He moved with that same predator's grace she remembered too well, and with every step, the walls seemed to close in on her. Not here. Not tonight. Her gaze darted, searching for escape. And then, she saw him, at the far end of the ballroom, surrounded by sycophants and admirers, stood a man who didn't just own the room. He ruled it. Adrian Blackwood, the billionaire everyone whispered about, the man whose empire stretched from steel towers to shadowy boardrooms. His smile was all polish, his suit custom-tailored perfection, his aura magnetic and dangerous in equal measure. People leaned toward him when he spoke, as though his words held the power to crown or destroy. And for a single, desperate heartbeat, Isabella thought, he looks safe. She didn't know yet. She couldn't know. But Damien was nearly upon her, and instinct screamed louder than reason. So she did the only thing she could think of. She stepped forward, crossed the space between herself and Adrian Blackwood, and before her fear could catch up, she grabbed his hand. The billionaire's conversation halted mid-sentence. His piercing eyes dropped to her fingers clutching his, then rose slowly to her face. For a moment, silence swallowed the entire ballroom. And then Adrian smiled. Not the practiced smile he gave to investors or politicians. This was sharper, hungrier, curling at the edge like smoke rising from fire. His grip tightened around hers, firm, almost possessive, as though he'd been waiting for her hand all along. "Darling," he murmured loud enough for those nearby to hear, his voice velvet threaded with steel. "I was wondering when you'd finally find me." Gasps rippled through the crowd. The assumption was instant. They were lovers, they were a secret romance, they were something. And across the ballroom, Damien Kane stopped dead in his tracks. His storm gray eyes darkened to black. His fists clenched. His jaw flexed. To everyone else, he looked like a jealous ex. But Isabella saw it differently. She saw the crack in his armor, the hurt, the fury, the unbearable recognition that she had chosen someone else. Her pulse thundered in her ears. She had no idea what she'd just done. But in that instant, she knew two things for certain. Damien wasn't going to let her go. Adrian Blackwood was no savior. If you were in Isabella's shoes, trapped between a dangerous ex and an even darker billionaire, whose hand would you have grabbed? Adrian Blackwood didn't release her hand. His thumb brushed deliberately against Isabella's knuckles. A subtle stroke that to onlookers looked tender, intimate. But to her, it felt like a warning. His touch wasn't gentle. It was possessive, a reminder of who held the reins in this moment. She forced a shaky smile, playing along for the crowd, though her lungs screamed for air. I didn't mean to interrupt. Adrian tilted his head, studying her with unnerving calm. His eyes dark pools that saw far too much. Oh, but you did, he said smoothly. His smile sharpened. And I find interruptions can be fascinating. The crowd tittered approvingly. Someone whispered, Blackwood has a lover, while another murmured, she's gorgeous. No wonder. Gossip slithered through the air like smoke. The billionaire had been linked to countless women, but never publicly, never with such blatant display. To them, Isabella was a mystery unfolding, a scandal wrapped in emerald silk. Her pulse throbbed in her ears, and then she felt it, that piercing gaze drilling into her back. Damien. She didn't have to turn to know he was there, burning holes into the scene. The memory of his voice, low and furious, echoed in her mind. No one touches what's mine, but she wasn't his anymore. Except his presence had a gravity that pulled at her bones, and her body betrayed her by trembling under its weight. Adrian leaned closer, his breath grazing her ear. Relax, he murmured, though the command made her spine stiffen. If you want to make him jealous, you've succeeded. Her eyes widened. You know him? Adrian's chuckle was soft, dangerous. Everyone knows Damien Kane. He's a man who doesn't forgive or forget. But tonight, my dear, you're with me. He lifted her hand and pressed his lips against her knuckles. The gesture was elegant, seductive to outsiders, but to her it felt like being branded. Gasps and whispers spread faster now. All eyes shifted between the ex across the room and the billionaire holding her hand. It wasn't just gossip anymore. It was a spectacle, a storm waiting to break. Damien began to move again, this time slower, more calculated. Each step deliberate, shoulders rigid, jaw locked. His gaze never wavered from her. And for a terrifying moment, Isabella thought he might actually strike Adrian in the middle of the gala. Adrian's smile didn't falter. If anything, it grew sharper, as though he was enjoying Damien's fury. Adrian Blackwood, Isabella whispered, her lips barely moving. What do you want from me? He tilted his head, his voice velvet but laced with something that made her blood chill. Want? That's an interesting word. I wasn't the one who crossed the room and claimed me, darling. But his eyes glittered with something predatory. I never turn down a gift when it falls into my hands. Her stomach dropped. She opened her mouth to speak, but before she could, Damien reached them. The space around them shifted instantly. Laughter fading, whispers silencing, the crowd instinctively pulling back. The tension was electric, coiled tight, ready to snap. Two men, one her past, one her supposed present, stood face to face, both radiating power in dangerously different ways. Let her go. Damien's voice was low, steady, but the promise of violence pulsed beneath each word. Adrian's grip tightened slightly, just enough to remind her he wasn't releasing her unless he chose to. His smile didn't waver as he looked Damien over, cool and unimpressed. You're interrupting. Damien stepped closer, his broad frame cutting between them and the rest of the crowd. "She doesn't belong to you." Adrian raised an eyebrow, his expression dripping with mock amusement. "And she belongs to you?" The question hung heavy in the air. The crowd inhaled as one, like spectators at a match where blood was certain. Isabella's heart hammered so hard it hurt. Her voice cracked as she forced herself to speak. "Stop, both of you." But neither man moved. Damien's eyes flicked to her, softening for only a fraction of a second before hardening again. "You don't know what you're doing," he muttered, almost like a warning. Her lips trembled. "I know exactly what I'm doing," she lied. Adrian's chuckle cut through the moment. "So much drama," he murmured, leaning back with infuriating calm. "Tell me, Kane, are you here to fight for her? Or to watch her finally realize she's safer with me?" The crowd gasped again. Damien's fists clenched, his jaw ticking. For one terrifying moment, Isabella thought he'd swing, consequences be damned. But instead, he took a slow, deliberate step back. His eyes never left hers, and in them she saw the storm raging, the hurt, the fury, the bone-deep ache of betrayal. Then, without a word, he turned and walked away. The crowd erupted in murmurs, the tension snapping like a string pulled too tight. Adrian still hadn't let go of her hand. "Well," he said smoothly, his eyes gleaming with dangerous satisfaction. "That was entertaining." Isabella tried to pull her hand free, but his grip was steel. "You made quite the choice tonight," Adrian whispered, low enough only she could hear. "And choices, darling, always have consequences." Her throat tightened, terror clawing its way up. She had thought she was escaping one monster, but as Adrian's smile lingered, she realized with sickening clarity, she might have just chosen the one who would destroy her. The music started again, violins swelling, as though the gala had collectively agreed to bury what just happened beneath more champagne and chatter. But Isabella's world had narrowed to the iron grip around her hand and the faint heat of Damien's absence across the room. Adrian Blackwood hadn't let her go. His smile was still firmly in place, dazzling to anyone watching, but his voice was low, sharp, and entirely for her. "Do you know what you've just done?" Her throat felt dry. You just made a declaration," he cut in, his thumb brushing over her pulse like he was counting each terrified beat. "To every investor, every politician, every parasite in this room, you've told them you're mine. You don't walk that back, darling. Not in my world." Her stomach twisted. "I didn't mean." "Oh, I know," Adrian said smoothly, leaning closer, his lips grazing her ear. "That's what makes it so interesting." The crowd around them had dispersed into smaller knots, whispers spreading like wildfire. She caught fragments. "Blackwood's woman?" Kane looked ready to kill. "She must be something special." Every word was a chain wrapping tighter around her neck. She dared a glance across the ballroom. Damien stood at the edge now, half-shadowed, half-lit. His hands were shoved into his pockets, but she could see the tension in every line of his body. He wasn't gone. He was waiting, watching. His eyes locked on hers, and for a heartbeat, the noise around her fell away. In his gaze she saw fury, yes, but also warning, as if he already knew what Adrian was, as if he was silently screaming at her to get out. Her breath hitched, but Adrian pulled her attention back with a gentle tug of her hand. "Dance with me." It wasn't a question. Before she could protest, he was already leading her onto the dance floor, his movements fluid, commanding. The orchestra shifted seamlessly into a waltz, and in seconds, she was pressed against him, moving where he led. To the crowd, they were mesmerizing, power and beauty entwined, the newest scandalous couple of the season. But to Isabella, it felt like shackles disguised as silk. Adrian's hand rested firmly on her lower back, guiding her with absolute control. Every spin, every step, reminded her she was not in charge. "You play the role beautifully," he murmured, his eyes never leaving hers. "So fragile, so desperate." Kane must be livid. Her chest tightened. "This isn't a game." His smile curved, dangerous. Everything is a game. And the moment you touched me, you became my favorite piece." She swallowed hard, forcing herself not to look back at Damien. The room spun with the dance, chandeliers flashing, skirts swirling. Adrian's grip never loosened, not for a second. When the music ended, applause filled the ballroom. Adrian bowed slightly, releasing her only long enough to kiss her hand again. Another performance for the crowd. But as soon as he straightened, his arms slid around her waist, holding her close. "You'll leave with me tonight," he said, quiet but certain. Her heart stuttered. "I can't." "You will." His eyes glittered with cold amusement. "Because if you don't, Kane will. And between the two of us, darling, I'm the safer choice." A shiver raced through her. Safer? There was nothing safe about the way he looked at her, as though she were a prize he'd already claimed. Adrian guided her off the floor, ignoring her stiff posture, his presence swallowing hers. The crowd parted for them, some smiling knowingly, others whispering. To them, this was romance, intrigue, power. To her, it was a trap closing in. Her gaze darted one last time toward Damien. He hadn't moved. Still at the edge of the ballroom, his storm-gray eyes locked on hers. But now there was something new there, something that made her knees weaken. Not just fury, not just warning, promise. And she knew, with bone-deep certainty, that her story with Damien Kane was far from over. Adrian's hand tightened on her waist, pulling her closer as he murmured, "Smile, Isabella. Everyone's watching. And soon, you'll learn what it means to belong to me." Her lips curved into a practiced smile, but inside, terror clawed at her chest. She had thought she'd escaped one monster tonight. Instead, she had just stepped willingly into the arms of another. And she didn't know if anyone, least of all Damien, could save her now. The gala was over in spirit, even if the music still played. For Isabella, time had stopped at the moment her hand touched Adrian Blackwood's. Every second since had stretched like glass, beautiful on the surface, but thin, fragile, ready to shatter with one wrong move. She should have let go the second Damien turned his back. She should have slipped into the crowd, vanished into anonymity. But Adrian's grip hadn't loosened, and her instincts screamed that breaking free now would be a mistake she couldn't survive. So she smiled for the world while inside, panic clawed at her ribs. The black limousine was already waiting at the steps, sleek and polished like a predator's jaw. Adrian ushered her forward with a hand at the small of her back, the gesture outwardly elegant but inwardly commanding. Every guest lingering outside the ballroom watched them descend together, murmuring, speculating. The flash of cameras blinded her for a moment. Someone had tipped off the press. Her name would be on headlines tomorrow. She slid into the leather seat, her breath shallow. Adrian followed, the door closing with a muffled thud that sealed her in darkness scented with leather and whiskey. The partition rolled up without him asking, shutting them off from the driver. Finally, she was alone with him. The mask dropped. Adrian leaned back, one arm stretching casually along the seat, his other hand still holding hers. He hadn't released her since the ballroom. His grip was firm, not painful, yet suffocating in its permanence. "You're trembling," he said softly, almost kindly. "I'm not." Her voice betrayed her with a quiver. His eyes gleamed, amused. "You are. It's intoxicating." Her stomach twisted. "Let me go." Adrian tilted his head, studying her as though she were a puzzle. "You walked into my world tonight. In front of everyone, you claimed me. And now you want to walk away? That's not how things work, Isabella." Her blood turned to ice. "I didn't claim you. I was running from him," Adrian finished smoothly. "From Damien Kane. I saw it in your eyes. The fear, the desperation. You thought I would be safer." His smile turned razor sharp. "That was your first mistake." Her breath caught. Adrian leaned in, his voice dropping to a whisper. "But don't worry. I can make you forget him. I can make you forget every man before me. Because when Adrian Blackwood wants something..." His lips brushed dangerously close to her ear. "He keeps it." They didn't drive to a restaurant or another party. The car slid through the glittering city before stopping at a skyscraper that kissed the clouds. Adrian's building, a fortress of glass and steel. The lobby guards greeted him by name. No one looked twice at her. To them, she was just another beautiful woman on his arm. Another secret he would use and discard. Except Adrian wasn't discarding her. Not yet. The elevator rose silently, her reflection fractured in mirrored walls. She avoided her own eyes, afraid of what she'd see there. Fear, shame, maybe even curiosity. The doors opened to a penthouse that stretched like an empire. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city, lights shimmering like constellations. It was beautiful. It was prison. Adrian poured 2 glasses of scotch, handing her one. Drink. You'll need it. She didn't touch it. His smile didn't falter. He set his glass down, stepping closer, his hand brushing a strand of hair from her face with unnerving gentleness. "You're very brave," he murmured, "or very foolish, running from a man like Cain and hiding in my arms? You must know I'm worse." Her chest tightened. "Then why keep me here?" Adrian's eyes darkened. "Because you chose me, and I want to see how far you'll go before you realize there's no escape." Her hand trembled at her side. She forced her voice to steady. "If you think you can break me, you're wrong." Adrian chuckled low, leaning close until his breath warmed her cheek. "I don't need to break you. I just need you to understand. You belong to me now." The words landed like a shackle snapping shut. Across the city, Damien Kane's apartment was filled with shadows. He stood at his window, still in his tux, hands clenched at his sides as he watched headlights streak below. His reflection in the glass was a man hardened by fury, yet haunted by regret. He should have dragged her out of there. He should have ripped her away from Blackwood's grip. Consequences be damned. But he hadn't, because when her eyes met his in the ballroom, he'd seen something that cut deeper than rage. He'd seen choice. She had chosen Adrian. That truth gnawed at him. But beneath the bitterness, one thought kept echoing. She's not safe. Damien knew Adrian Blackwood's reputation. He'd buried men like him before. Wolves dressed in silk, hiding claws behind charm. And Isabella, fragile, reckless Isabella, had just stepped into the wolf's den. Damien's fist slammed against the glass. He could still see her hand slipping into Blackwood's. He could still feel the betrayal like a blade in his ribs. But he couldn't shake the image of her trembling. And Damien Kane had never been able to watch her break. Not then. Not now. Back at the penthouse, the night stretched long. Adrian moved through the space with ease, pouring himself another drink, making calls, issuing commands. He was a man who owned everything in sight, and he treated her presence as though it were inevitable. When she tried to leave, he blocked the door with a quiet laugh. "Where would you go? Back to him? You'd be safer in fire than in Damien Kane's arms." Her voice cracked. "And I'm safer in yours?" Adrian's smile thinned. "No, but at least in mine, you'll survive long enough to matter." Something inside her twisted at the words, because survival wasn't the same as living. And as terrifying as Damien was, he had once made her feel alive. Adrian saw the flicker in her eyes. His voice hardened. "Don't think about him. You're here now, with me." For the first time that night, she pulled her hand free. Her voice was low but steady. "I don't belong to you." Adrian's laughter was soft, chilling. "Not yet, but you will." His words seared into her bones. And for the first time, she realized with terrifying clarity, her ex might not have been the worst mistake of her life. Because the billionaire whose hand she grabbed tonight, he might be the man who ends it. If you were Isabella, stuck in Adrian's penthouse after that deadly hand grab, would you fight to escape, or stay close to him to survive? Share your answer in the comments. Morning light bled across the glass walls of Adrian Blackwood's penthouse, turning the city below into gold. To most, it would have felt like paradise. Waking in sheets softer than silk, surrounded by priceless art, knowing that a billionaire's world was at your feet. But for Isabella, it felt like a cage with invisible bars. She hadn't slept. Every creak of the penthouse, every whisper of air conditioning, had felt like Adrian watching. She lay rigid on the edge of the bed, still in the emerald gown from the gala, too afraid to undress, too restless to close her eyes. When she finally sat up, Adrian was already awake. He leaned against the doorway, perfectly dressed in a crisp white shirt, coffee in hand, like he hadn't slept either. His gaze slid over her slowly, a man appraising property. "You look like you've been haunted all night," he murmured. Her throat tightened. "Because I have," Adrian chuckled, setting his cup down. "You wound me. Most women would kill to wake up here. I'm not most women." "No," he said softly, eyes narrowing. "You're not." He stepped closer, his presence filling the room. She forced herself not to flinch when his hand brushed her shoulder, fingertips grazing her skin. "I don't understand you yet, Isabella." Running from Cain into my arms, bold. Stupid but bold. Most people avoid choosing between devils. You. His thumb traced her collarbone. "You picked one." Her pulse raced, but she refused to look away. "I won't be your possession." His smile was cold. "Resistance makes the game more interesting." By noon, the tabloids had exploded. "Blackwood's mystery woman. Who is she?" splashed across every site. Photographs from the gala. Her hand in Adrian's, his lips at her knuckles, Damien glaring across the ballroom, were plastered across screens. Her phone buzzed nonstop. Friends, co-workers, even estranged family, all asking if it was true. She silenced it, stomach twisting. This wasn't just Adrian's game anymore. The world thought she belonged to him. Adrian watched her scroll with detached amusement. Let them talk. Public perception is the easiest leash. Her hands trembled. "I never wanted this." He sipped his drink. "You touched me, Isabella. In my world, that's consent. And now the city believes you're mine. That belief is stronger than truth." She wanted to scream, to tear at her hair, to deny it all. But somewhere deep down, she feared he was right. The story had taken root, and nothing she said would undo it. That evening, a knock thundered against the penthouse door. Isabella froze. Adrian's head tilted slightly, irritation flickering across his features. He rose, unhurried, and opened the door. Damien Cain stood there. The hallway light framed him in sharp relief. Broad shoulders, jaw set, storm-gray eyes locked on Adrian with lethal intent. Adrian's lips curved. "And here comes the other devil." "Let her go," Damien growled. "Again with the commands," Adrian mused, leaning against the doorframe. "Do you ever tire of pretending you own what doesn't belong to you?" Damien's jaw tightened. His gaze cut past Adrian to find her, standing pale and rigid across the room. His voice softened, almost imperceptibly. "Isabella, come with me." Her chest ached. The sound of her name in his voice unraveled something deep inside her. Adrian glanced back at her, smirking. "Ah, the damsel's choice. How delicious." He stepped aside mockingly, though his tone dripped with control. "Go on, darling. Run back to the man who broke you. See if he does better this time." Her hands shook at her sides. The memory of Damien's anger, his cruel words, the nights she'd cried herself to sleep, they clashed with the memory of his arms shielding her, his eyes softening in rare, stolen moments. Damien reached a hand toward her, jaw clenched. "Please." Her body yearned to move, but her mind screamed, "Don't trust him. He'll break you again." Adrian's gaze burned into her. "Choose." Her lips parted, but no sound came. And then, trembling, she whispered, "I'm staying." The silence was suffocating. Damien's eyes widened a fraction, betrayal etched across his face. For a moment, he looked like she'd stabbed him. Then the mask slammed down again, his expression carved from stone. "Fine," he said flatly. "But don't say I didn't warn you." He turned and walked away, each step heavy with fury and hurt. The door slammed shut behind him. Isabella's knees buckled. Adrian chuckled low, stepping toward her, his presence swallowing the room. "Oh, darling." That was almost touching. The way he begged, the way you hesitated. But in the end, you made the right choice. Her stomach twisted. The right choice? Adrian's smile darkened. You stayed. For days, Isabella clung to denial like a lifeline. She told herself she could handle Adrian. That he was cruel, yes, but predictable. That he wouldn't kill her, not while she was still his prize. Every time she caught herself glancing at her phone, waiting for a message from Damien, she shoved the thought down. He wasn't her savior. He couldn't be. And yet, she dreamed of him. Of the way his eyes had softened when he said her name. Of the regret in his voice. Of the fire in his gaze when he looked at Adrian, ready to fight. Denial was easier by day. Night it cracked. She lay awake, replaying every word, every choice. And no matter how hard she tried to silence it, one truth kept pounding at her chest. She had chosen the wrong man. Adrian sensed her resistance. He pressed harder. He had her escorted to charity events, her name printed beside his in articles, her image cemented beside his in cameras. Every outing was a performance, his hand tight around hers, his smile polished, his dominance unmistakable. The city believed the illusion. She was his. Behind closed doors, he made sure she didn't forget it. He never struck her, he didn't need to. His control was sharper than violence. His words, his gaze, his grip, all told her the same story. You can't leave. And slowly, against her will, a seed of terror grew roots. But Damien hadn't gone far. He trailed her in shadows, always at the edge of the crowd. At charity galas, in chauffeured cars, outside Adrian's building. She would catch a flash of storm-gray eyes before he vanished again. It infuriated her, comforted her. Because as much as she resisted him, as much as she told herself he wasn't the answer, deep inside she knew. If anyone could break Adrian's hold, it was Damien Kane. And yet, pride kept her chained in silence. The first snow of winter dusted the city, softening its edges with white silence. Inside Adrian Blackwood's penthouse, however, silence didn't exist. It was fractured by phone calls, business meetings, footsteps of assistants, an empire running on Adrian's command. And Isabella was its unwilling centerpiece. She had perfected the smile for cameras. She had mastered the art of silence at Adrian's side. But beneath the emerald dresses and diamond necklaces, her soul screamed for air. That evening, Adrian announced casually over dinner, "We're attending a foundation gala this weekend. A smaller circle, but important. Everyone who matters will be there." Her fork froze. She hadn't yet recovered from the last one. He noticed. His lips curved faintly. "Don't worry, darling. You'll play your part well. You always do." She swallowed, forcing a nod. What he didn't say, what she didn't know, was that Damien Kane was on the guest list too. The gala was hosted in a marble hall glittering with chandeliers. Isabella's heels clicked against the polished floor as Adrian guided her in, hand possessive on her back. Cameras flashed. Whispers trailed them. Blackwood's mystery woman. But then her heart stopped. Across the room, in a dark suit that made him look like sin and salvation combined, stood Damien. His eyes locked on hers instantly, storm-gray and unyielding. The air between them snapped like a live wire. Adrian noticed. His grip on her waist tightened. "Ah, speak of the devil." Damien moved toward them, each step controlled, his gaze never leaving Isabella. Guests parted instinctively, sensing danger in his stride. "Blackwood," Damien said flatly. His eyes flicked to Isabella, softening for a split second before hardening again. "Isabella." Her lips parted, but no words came. Adrian smirked. "What a coincidence. The three of us together again. Shall we pretend civility?" Damien's jaw flexed. "Pretending was never my strength." The evening unfolded like a game of chess. Adrian paraded Isabella through introductions, but Damien lingered close, always within reach, always watching. Every time Adrian touched her, Damien's jaw tightened. Every time Damien's gaze lingered too long, Adrian's smile sharpened. At dinner, fate or Adrian's orchestration placed them at the same table. Isabella sat between them, caught in a storm. Adrian poured her wine, his hand brushing hers deliberately. "To new beginnings," he murmured. Damien leaned back, eyes on her. "Some beginnings are just old mistakes in disguise." The table fell silent, guests sensing the tension. Isabella's chest ached. She wanted to scream at both of them, to tear free, to run. But she sat frozen, lips pressed tight. Her silence became its own answer, and both men read it differently. Adrian as victory, Damien as betrayal. Later, when the music swelled and couples drifted to the dance floor, Adrian pulled her close. His hand pressed firmly against her back, leading her with flawless grace. To outsiders, they looked perfect, but her heart wasn't in the dance. It was in the shadows, where Damien stood watching, fire in his eyes. Halfway through the song, Adrian leaned close, whispering against her ear. "Do you feel his eyes burning into you? He wants you. He always will. But you're mine now." Her breath shook. "I'm not yours." Adrian's smile didn't falter. "Then prove it. Walk to him. Leave my arms in front of all these people. Show the world whose you are." Her steps faltered. The challenge was a blade pressed to her throat, but she couldn't move. Fear, pride, confusion. Every emotion tangled, chaining her to stillness. Adrian's chuckle was low, victorious. "That's what I thought." The night ended late. Snow fell thicker now, muffling the city. Isabella slipped into a quiet hallway for a moment's breath, her chest tight. That's when Damien found her. He stepped from the shadows, anger etched across his face. "Why are you still with him?" Her pulse raced. "Because leaving him isn't as simple as you think." "It is," Damien growled. He stepped closer, his presence overwhelming. "One word, Isabella. One word, and I'll tear you out of his world." Her throat tightened. "And then what? Back to you? Back to the man who broke me first." His eyes flashed with pain. "I never meant to." "You did." She cut in, voice trembling. "You broke me, and now he owns me. Don't you see? I can't escape either of you." Damien's chest heaved. For a moment, the mask cracked. Raw regret flickered across his features. He reached for her hand, voice low. "I would burn everything down to give you back your freedom." Tears stung her eyes. For one dizzying second, she wanted to believe him, but footsteps echoed Adrian's. Isabella yanked her hand back. Adrian appeared, his smile cold. How touching. The fallen knight begging for a second chance. His gaze slid to Isabella. "And did you beg with him too?" Her stomach dropped. Adrian stepped closer, wrapping an arm around her waist, pulling her against him like a shield. His voice was silk over steel. "Go home, Kane. She's mine." Damien's fists clenched. His voice was a growl. "This isn't over." Their eyes locked, two predators circling the same prey. And Isabella, trapped between them, felt the walls closing in. If you were Isabella, torn between a dangerous billionaire and the ex who shattered you, who would you risk your life to trust? Drop your answer in the comments. Snow blanketed the city in silence, but inside Adrian's penthouse, silence was impossible. It was filled with tension, footsteps, the scrape of glass against wood. Adrian poured himself whiskey by the window, his posture as precise as a statue carved from marble. Isabella sat curled on the couch, her dress exchanged for one of his silk robes, the fabric too soft, too intimate. She hated how easily he'd clothed her in his world. Finally, she broke the silence. "Why Damien? Why do you hate him so much?" Adrian's jaw flexed. He didn't turn. "Hate is too simple a word." "Then what?" He swirled the whiskey, amber catching the city lights. "History, betrayal, blood." Her breath caught. "What happened between you?" He looked at her then, eyes sharp as blades. "Do you want the truth, or the story?" "The truth." Adrian smirked faintly. "The truth is, once, Damien Kane and I were not enemies. Once we were brothers in ambition." Adrian's voice took on a strange rhythm, each word deliberate, like he was dragging the past from a place he'd buried deep. "Years ago, before the world knew my name, I built my empire from shadows. Damien was there. He had his own darkness, his own hunger. We thrived together. Power, money, control, it was intoxicating. He took a slow sip of whiskey. But ambition is a blade that cuts both ways. One night, everything unraveled. A deal went wrong. Blood was spilled. And Adrian's eyes burned. Damien chose survival over loyalty. He left me to rot while he walked free. Her heart pounded. And you survived. Adrian's lips curled. Of course I did. I don't die easily. But the man who crawled out of that wreckage wasn't the same. And Damien Kane has owed me ever since. He stepped closer, his gaze searing into her. That's why I keep you, Isabella. Because when he looks at you, I see the fear in his eyes. You are my leverage, my revenge. Her stomach twisted. She was a weapon in their war. A pawn. The next day, fate intervened again. Isabella slipped into a cafe across town, desperate for air away from Adrian's gaze. She hadn't expected Damien to be there, waiting as though he knew she'd come. He stood when she entered, his presence commanding, his eyes tired. Isabella, he said softly. Her throat tightened. You knew I'd come here? I know you, he murmured. Better than he ever will. Her chest ached. She wanted to deny it, but part of her knew it was true. She sat, and for a moment they just stared across the small table, the hum of the cafe a strange cocoon. Finally, she whispered, Adrian told me about your past, that you betrayed him, left him to die. Damien's jaw clenched. His gaze dropped to the scar running across his knuckle, a relic of battles long past. That's his story, not the truth. Then tell me. He looked up, storm gray eyes raw. The truth is, Adrian was always darker than me. We built things together, yes. But when the deal went wrong, it wasn't just business. He wanted blood. He wanted chaos. I couldn't follow him down that path. Her breath caught. I didn't leave him to die, Damien said, voice thick. I saved him. I dragged him out, half dead, while bullets flew. But when he woke up, he hated me for it. Because survival meant weakness to him. Because I chose life over vengeance. Her hands trembled. 2 stories. 2 truths. Which was real? Damien leaned forward, voice breaking. He wants to own you because he can't own me anymore. But don't let his war consume you. You deserve more than to be our battlefield. Tears burned her eyes. She didn't trust him, not fully, but God. She wanted to. That night, back in Adrian's penthouse, she found something she wasn't supposed to. He had been drinking heavier than usual, his footsteps unsteady, his voice sharp with old ghosts. He left his study door ajar. Inside, among stacks of papers and dossiers, she found a photograph. 2 men, younger, sharper, Adrian and Damien, side by side, smiling, arms slung over each other's shoulders. Brothers once. Her breath hitched. Adrian appeared in the doorway, his voice low, dangerous. You shouldn't be in here. She turned, the photo trembling in her hand. You loved him once. Adrian's eyes flickered, just for a second, with something that looked like grief. Then the mask snapped back. He snatched the photo, ripping it in half before her eyes. Love is a weakness, he hissed. And weakness gets you killed. He threw the torn pieces into the fire. The flames devoured them, sparks rising like lost memories. Isabella watched, heartbreaking. Not for him, not for Damien, but for the part of herself that still believed either man could save her. Days bled together. She was paraded in public, whispered about in tabloids, claimed by a man whose touch chilled her, watched by an ex whose gaze burned her. The backstories didn't free her, they bound her tighter, because now she knew the truth. Both men were broken. Both carried scars that made them dangerous, and she was tangled in their ruin. But deep in her chest, a spark flickered. If she could understand their pasts, maybe, just maybe, she could find a way to survive their present. The love triangle is no longer just about control or desire. It's rooted in betrayal, history, and grief. Isabella had grown used to fear. She'd lived on adrenaline for weeks, every breath laced with tension. every step measured, every word careful. But that morning in Adrian's penthouse, something shifted. He wasn't at his desk barking orders. He wasn't parading her in front of cameras. He was sitting on the piano bench, head bowed, fingers hovering above the keys like a man unsure of how to touch something delicate. She froze in the doorway. Adrian didn't notice her at first. His hands moved slowly, and the notes that followed weren't sharp or commanding. They were hesitant, fragile, like a language he'd forgotten. It was the first time she'd seen him stripped of power. When he finally looked up, surprise flickered in his eyes. Then came the mask, the smirk. Eavesdropping. I didn't know you played. He shrugged lightly, but something haunted lingered in his gaze. Not anymore, just muscle memory. She stepped closer, almost against her will. Why did you stop? Adrian's smile thinned. Because music doesn't win wars. But the ache in his voice said otherwise. That day, Adrian didn't treat her like property. He didn't drag her to meetings or tighten his leash. Instead, he let her exist beside him. They shared coffee. He asked her opinion on a painting he'd bought. Not as a test, but genuinely curious. For hours, the air between them softened, and Isabella caught glimpses of a man he buried under layers of steel. Terrified her, because for the first time, she wondered if the monster had once been human, and if somewhere, buried deep, he still was. 2 nights later, she met Damien again. Not in shadows or danger, but in the sanctuary of a chapel at midnight. She'd slipped away, desperate for air, and found him there, sitting in a pew, head bowed like a man praying though his lips never moved. When he saw her, his eyes widened, then softened. You shouldn't be here, he whispered. Neither should you. They sat in silence, candles flickering between them. Finally, Isabella spoke, her voice low. Adrian showed me the scars of his past. You showed me yours. But I don't know what's real anymore. Damien's throat worked. What's real is this. He reached out, his hand hovering near hers on the pew. I never stopped caring about you. Not for a single damn day. Her chest ached. She wanted to pull away. She wanted to lean in. Instead, she whispered, You hurt me. His eyes closed, pain flashing across his face. I know. And if I could go back, if I could tear that version of me apart, I would. But all I can do is stand here now and tell you, I'd burn everything to keep you safe. Her fingers trembled. Against every instinct, she let them brush his. The smallest touch. And in that chapel, surrounded by silence, a fragile thread of trust wove itself back between them. In the days that followed, Isabella lived between 2 worlds. With Adrian, she saw cracks, moments of humanity, glimpses of the boy he had been before the empire hardened him. With Damien, she felt the echo of old love, the raw ache of what they once shared, now shadowed by regret and longing. Neither man was safe. Both carried darkness. And yet, in their own fractured ways, both made her feel something she hadn't felt in months. Alive. It was a snowy afternoon when peace came, fragile and fleeting. Adrian had taken her to his mountain estate for the weekend, far from cameras, far from the city's roar. For once, the walls felt less like prison bars. They cooked together, clumsy, awkward, but almost normal. She laughed when Adrian burned the garlic, and for a second his expression softened into something boyish, unguarded. Later, she walked alone in the snow-dusted garden, and Damien appeared. He had followed, as always, refusing to let distance sever his vigil. They argued, they laughed, and when the cold bit too hard, he draped his coat over her shoulders without asking. Her heart split in two, because in that moment, between laughter and warmth, she realized the unthinkable. She could love either of them. She already did in different ways. That night, alone in her room, Isabella pressed her face into her hands, trembling. Adrian's quiet humanity, Damien's desperate devotion. Both had touched parts of her soul she thought were dead. And though fear still gripped her, though danger still loomed, for the first time, she didn't feel entirely alone. A fragile bond had formed. Not trust, Not safety, but something dangerously close to love. It was beautiful. It was terrifying, because bonds in her world were made only to be broken. The mountain estate was quiet that morning. Snow fell in lazy spirals outside the tall windows, and for a brief, impossible moment, Isabella let herself believe in peace. She brewed coffee. She watched flakes drift across the pines. She almost believed she could stay here, caught between two broken men who, for once, seemed to hold back their claws. But peace was fragile, and fragility never lasted. Adrian was in his study when his voice sharpened, cold and lethal. She heard the crash of glass, the scrape of furniture. By the time she rushed in, his eyes were wildfire. He turned on her like a storm unleashed. "You met him," Adrian hissed. "You met Damien when I wasn't looking." Her chest tightened. Don't lie to me." His voice cracked like a whip. "Do you think I don't have eyes everywhere? Do you think I wouldn't know?" Her throat burned. "Yes, I saw him. Because he's the only one who doesn't treat me like a possession." The words were out before she could take them back. Adrian's jaw clenched, his hands trembling with rage. "You ungrateful little—" He stopped himself, voice dropping to something darker. "I gave you everything. Protection, power, the world at your feet. And you crawl back to him?" Tears blurred her vision. "Because with him, I still feel like me." The silence that followed was worse than his shouting. Adrian's eyes iced over. Whatever humanity she had glimpsed in him shattered. "You've made your choice," he said coldly. "Now live with it." She found Damien that evening, desperation twisting her insides. He was waiting in the stables, as though he'd known she would come. "Damien," she whispered, her voice breaking. "He knows. Adrian knows about us." His eyes hardened. "Then we run. Tonight. I'll get you out." For a moment, hope flared. She wanted to believe him. She wanted to trust the man who once broke her but now swore to save her. But then she saw it. The papers half hidden in his coat. Documents, signatures, business deals. Adrian's empire, stolen piece by piece. Her stomach dropped. "You're not here for me." Damien froze. "You're here for revenge." Her voice cracked. "This isn't about saving me. It's about destroying him." His silence was answer enough. Tears stung her eyes. "I was a fool to think either of you cared about me beyond your war." "Isabella," he reached for her. She pulled back, shaking. Don't touch me." Her heart shattered as she turned away, the snow crunching beneath her steps. Behind her, Damien's voice was raw, desperate. "It's not like that. I do care. I always—" But she didn't stay to hear the rest. She wandered through the snow, the cold biting into her bones. Adrian's rage, Damien's betrayal. It all crashed into her at once. She had become a pawn, a prize, a battlefield. Not a woman, not a soul. Just leverage in a war that had started long before she entered it. Her chest ached with a hollow grief. Maybe I was never enough. Maybe I was never worth saving. The thought lodged deep, heavy and unshakable. That night, she locked herself in her room. Adrian didn't come. Damien didn't come. The silence screamed louder than any fight. She stared at her reflection in the mirror. The hollow eyes, the trembling lips, the woman she barely recognized. Tears streamed down her cheeks. Who am I anymore? No answer came. Only the echo of two men's voices, both claiming, both breaking, both using. And in the stillness of that night, Isabella's last thread of hope snapped. The snowstorm howled outside, rattling the windows like an omen. Inside the mountain estate, silence wrapped around Isabella like chains. Days blurred. She barely ate. She barely spoke. Adrian hadn't returned to her room since the fight. Damien hadn't appeared again after she saw the truth in his coat pocket. She was alone, truly alone. And yet, in that silence, something inside her stirred. Not hope, not yet, but anger. A slow, simmering fury at the prison of her life, at the men who claimed her, at herself for letting them. "Enough!" she whispered into the empty room, her voice hoarse. I won't be a pawn anymore. On the third night, Adrian knocked. Just once. The sound was quiet, tentative, unlike the man she knew. When she didn't answer, the door opened anyway. He stepped inside, shadows clinging to his frame. I shouldn't be here, he said first, almost to himself. Her voice was flat. Then leave. But he didn't. He moved closer, his mask gone, his face carved with exhaustion. I was wrong. About everything. About you. About us. She laughed bitterly. Now you realize? His jaw tightened. I've built an empire on control, on never needing anyone. And then you walked in and made me. He broke off, shaking his head. I don't know how to do this. I only know how to break things. Tears stung her eyes, but she refused to let them fall. Then why keep me? Why not set me free? Adrian's voice cracked, softer than she'd ever heard. Because without you, I'm nothing but the monster I swore I'd never become. For the first time, he wasn't the billionaire or the predator. He was just a man, broken and desperate, and yet part of her still didn't trust him. The next day, Damien came, not in secret this time. He stormed into the estate, ignoring guards, ignoring rules, ignoring Adrian's fury when the two men finally clashed in the great hall. Isabella heard their shouts echoing through the stone walls. Rage, old wounds, threats laced with blood. She rushed down just as Damien's fist met Adrian's jaw. Stop! She screamed, her voice cutting through the chaos. Both men froze, their chests heaving, eyes burning with a hatred that could swallow the world. Her voice shook. Do either of you see me? Or am I just the prize at the end of your war? The silence that followed was louder than the fight. That night, Isabella stood alone in the chapel again. Candles flickered, casting her face in gold and shadow. She whispered into the emptiness, her words trembling. I can't do this anymore. I can't keep being torn apart. Her heart pounded. The choice wasn't between Adrian and Damien. It was between silence and vulnerability, between staying broken or daring to reach for something more. Slowly, she sank to her knees. For the first time, she prayed not for rescue, not for safety, but for courage. When she rose, her decision was made. She would not run. She would not hide. She would face both men, bear her truth, and let them see her not as leverage or possession, but as the woman she truly was. Whether they accepted it or destroyed her no longer mattered. At dawn, she called them both. Adrian in his study, Damien in the courtyard. Two storms waiting to explode. She stood between them, her voice trembling but strong. This ends now. Adrian's eyes narrowed. Damien's fists clenched. She lifted her chin. You both claim to love me, but love isn't chains or revenge. Love is sacrifice. Love is seeing me, and if you can't give me that, then I choose myself. The words hung in the icy air, final and sharp. Adrian flinched, as if the ground had shifted beneath him. Damien's shoulders sagged, guilt carving his face. For the first time, both men were silent. And for the first time, Isabella felt powerful. Later, she stood on the balcony, the sunrise painting the mountains in fire. Adrian approached slowly, carefully. You're right, he murmured. I don't know how to love without breaking things. But if you'll let me, I'll learn. And then Damien, appearing behind her, voice raw. I don't deserve forgiveness, but I'll spend the rest of my life trying to earn it. Tears slid down her cheeks, not from pain this time, but from the weight of finally being seen. She didn't answer them yet. She wasn't ready, but for the first time, she knew she had the power to choose. And that was everything. The mountain air was sharp, the snow glittering like shards of glass. Isabella stood on the balcony, her hands gripping the railing as Adrian and Damien lingered behind her in the silence of aftermath. For weeks she had been dragged, cornered, claimed. But now, for the first time, she wasn't prey. She wasn't leverage. She was the one holding the power. Her voice carried in the thin morning air. I won't live in cages anymore. If either of you want me in your life, you'll have to let me be free. The words struck like thunder. Adrian bowed his head, his jaw clenched. Damien turned away, guilt carving his features. Neither man argued. Neither man tried to bind her. For once, they listened. Later that day, Adrian found her in the piano room. The same keys she had once seen him touch with hesitation now reflected the fire in his eyes. "I've done terrible things," he admitted. His voice was raw, stripped of its mask. "But I won't lose you to them. So here it is." He pushed a folder across the piano lid. "Your freedom. Signed. Sealed. You can walk away from me forever." Her breath caught. "I can't undo the fear I've caused you," Adrian continued, his voice trembling. "But I can give you back your life, even if it kills me." For the first time, Isabella saw not the billionaire, not the predator, but the man who finally understood love was letting go. Her eyes filled with tears. That night, she found Damien waiting in the chapel, the place that had seen both their pain and their fragile reconnection. He stood as she entered, his hands trembling. "I can't take back the man I was, but I can swear this. I'll never use you as a weapon again." He dropped a stack of papers at her feet, proof of every scheme, every move he'd made to dismantle Adrian's empire. "I'll burn it all. For you. For us." Isabella's heart clenched. Damien looked at her with eyes that were no longer angry, no longer hungry for revenge, but filled with remorse. "If love means nothing more than watching you walk away safe, then I'll let you go." It broke her, because for the first time Damien wasn't clinging. He was releasing. The next evening, Adrian hosted one last gala. This time not for empire, not for power, but as his final move to sever his old life. The glittering lights mirrored that first night when Isabella's trembling hand had reached for the wrong savior. Now, she walked into the room not as prey, but as a woman who had survived both monsters and men. Adrian stood beside her, silent but steady, no longer gripping her hand like a possession. Damien lingered in the shadows, watching, his presence not a threat but a promise. When a stranger brushed too close, Isabella didn't flinch. She lifted her chin, her eyes blazing. She was no longer running. By the night's end, she stood outside beneath the stars. Both men approached, each waiting, each silent. Her voice was soft, but firm. "I asked for freedom, and you both gave it. But freedom doesn't mean being alone." She turned first to Adrian. "You showed me your humanity. You gave me my life back." Her hand brushed his briefly, gratitude heavy in her touch. Then to Damien, "You gave up revenge. You gave me truth. And you showed me love doesn't have to be chains." Tears filled her eyes as she breathed. "For the first time, I feel seen. And I choose." She closed her eyes, her heart hammering. And when she opened them, she stepped toward the man who had once broken her, but had fought to redeem himself. "Damien." Gasps echoed from those who saw, but Isabella didn't care. She reached for his hand. Not in desperation, not in fear, but in love. And this time, she wasn't saving herself from danger. She was choosing her own future. Weeks later, the war between Adrian and Damien ended. Not with fire, but with surrender. Adrian retreated from empire, his humanity slowly mending. Damien stood beside Isabella not as her keeper, but as her partner. They moved forward, scarred but stronger, building a life not on fear but on truth. One morning, as sunlight spilled through the windows, Isabella turned to Damien with tears in her eyes. "I never thought I'd find love here, not in the ruins, not in the danger." Damien cupped her face, his voice trembling. "Sometimes the most broken love is the one worth saving." And when he kissed her, it wasn't a claim. It was a promise. A promise that, after everything, she had finally found love at last.
Thank you for watching this story to the end. If you enjoyed this story, you will surely love the next one. It's as crazier and more intriguing as you can ever imagine. So do check it out. Click on the image showing on your screen right now to watch the next one.